A billionaire saving $1.2 million simply by changing their address to Florida is basically a rounding error.
Right. It's just a drop in the bucket for them.
Exactly. But for a middle-class family in New York, getting hit with an unexpected 50% tax bill might force them to sell their childhood home forever.
Yeah, that is a completely different reality.
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today, we are exploring the fiercely debated, high-stakes world of estate taxes and wealth mobility. Basically, what happens to your money when you die and how states fight over it.
And, we have a really fascinating stack of sources for you today to help unpack all of this.
We do. We're pulling from a rigorous economic study from UC Berkeley and the San Francisco Fed. We've got official New York City comptroller budget reports, some really flashy real estate marketing materials, and sharply contrasting op-eds from Black Westchester and Real Clear Politics.
It's a lot of ground to cover, but the mission here is to figure out the actual fiscal calculus of taxing the wealthy. Like, why do billionaires flee, and does it actually hurt state budgets when they do?
Right. And we are also going to look at the explosive debate happening right now around NYC Mayor Zohran Mamdani's pretty radical plan to rewrite the rules of wealth inheritance.
Which is definitely turning some heads.
Oh, absolutely. But before we get into it, I need to make a really explicit disclaimer to you, the listener. Some of these sources contain highly politically charged content. We're talking strong arguments from both the left and the right.
Very strong.
Yeah. So we are taking absolutely no sides here. We're not endorsing any of these policies. We're merely acting as impartial guides, just conveying the ideas and the math presented in the original source material.
Right. We're just laying out the facts. And to understand the current political firestorm in New York, we actually need to establish a baseline. We need to look at how the ultra-rich actually respond to taxes in the real world.
Okay, so where do we start with that?
Well, the Berkeley and San Francisco Fed study is perfect for this. They tracked the Forbes 400, the absolute richest people in America, from 1982 all the way to 2017.
That's a huge timeline. Why start in the 80s?
Because it covers a massive shift in the law. See, back in 2001, there was a federal tax reform. Before that reform, the federal government gave a credit that basically absorbed estate taxes.
So if you lived in a high-tax state, the federal government just kind of balanced it out for you.
Exactly. The federal code essentially masked the state-level differences. But the 2001 reform wiped that out. Overnight, estate taxes mattered a lot.
Wow. So suddenly where you live becomes a massive financial decision. It's like a lifetime cover charge for living in a specific state.
That's a great way to put it. And the study found that billionaires are highly mobile. I mean, 35% of local billionaires will pack up and leave states with an estate tax.
Wait, 35%? Over a third of them just leave.
Yeah, and that flight risk goes up significantly as they get older. But here's the catch. For the ones who stay, the statutory tax rate, the one on the books, is usually around 16%. But the effective rate, what they actually pay, is only about 8.25%.
How are they cutting their tax bill in half?
Through charitable deductions, massive trust funds, intense wealth sheltering. They have armies of lawyers. But even at that lower 8.25% rate, it's still enough to drive a third of them away.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because this seems crazy. If 35% of the ultra-wealthy are packing up and leaving, and the sources say they take about $80.7 billion in wealth exposure with them, isn't adopting an estate tax just a massive financial blunder for a state?
You would think so, right? I mean, you lose their future personal income tax forever.
Exactly.
But the researchers found a massive aha moment in the data. For the vast majority of states, it's still worth it. Because when a billionaire does decide to stay and eventually dies in that state, the one-time influx of cash is just astronomical.
How much are we talking about here?
An average spike of $165 million in estate tax revenue from one person. So the researchers calculated an average cost-benefit ratio of 0.69.
Okay, so 0.69, meaning the state gains 31% more than it loses.
Spot on.
Yeah.
For every dollar they lose in income tax from the billionaires who fled, they gain $1.71 from the ones who stayed. It is mathematically a winning gamble for most states.
Most states.
Yeah.
But the sources point out one glaring exception, right? California.
Yes, California is the big outlier. Their top personal income tax rate is so incredibly high that losing a living billionaire's annual income tax costs the state way more than the eventual estate tax windfall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, their cost-benefit ratio is 1.45. So for California, keeping the billionaire alive and paying income tax is much more profitable.
That makes sense. But for everyone else, the math generally favors keeping the tax. Which brings us to the poaching game. If I'm a low-tax state, I want to steal those wealthy residents.
Oh, they actively hunt for them. Just look at the real estate marketing materials we have from Florida. Firms down there, like Sarasota Perry, they don't just sell you a nice beach house. They explicitly market Florida's 0% estate and income tax as a clean slate for wealthy New Yorkers.
And New York makes it pretty easy for them to leave, honestly, because of how their tax system is structured. Let's look at New York's current setup. They have a $7.35 million exemption, right? And a 16% top rate.
Correct. But they also have this bizarre trapdoor called the estate tax cliff.
The cliff. This is wild. Explain how this cliff works, because it's not like normal income tax.
Right. Normally, taxes work like a staircase. You only pay a higher rate on the money that steps into the new bracket. But the New York cliff means if your estate exceeds the $7.35 million exemption by just 5%, they wipe out the exemption completely.
So they tax the entire estate from dollar one.
The entire thing,
Yeah.
from the very first dollar. So if you have an estate worth $7.72 million, you face a marginal tax rate of 400% on that final $20,000 of asset appreciation.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If I'm a millionaire, I am literally incentivized to throw away that extra $20,000. I'd light it on fire just to avoid falling off this cliff and paying a $1.2 million tax bill. How does this play out in real life?
It plays out as a voluntary exodus. The sources talk about a Manhattan CEO who saved $1.22 million in projected taxes just by moving his official domicile to Sarasota. It turns wealth preservation into this weird geographical game of chess.
It really does. So the current system is already driving some wealth away.
Yeah.
And now, enter New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani. He's proposing a radical overhaul that threatens to just pour gasoline on this whole fire.
Yeah, Mamdani is a democratic socialist, and he's looking at a city with a yawning structural deficit. The Comptroller reports put it anywhere from $5.4 billion to $7.1 billion.
That's a massive hole in the
Imagine
budget.
finding out
What's
your
causing
electric
it?
bill
A lot of
is
chronically
secretly
under-budgeted
funding the
costs.
government's
Things
massive
like
city
spending
shelters,
addiction.
public assistance,
It
special
is
education
a pretty
due
shocking
process.
realization
The
when
city
you
is
actually
legally
look at the
obligated
math.
to pay for
Right.
these, but the money
Well,
just isn't
imagine
there.
for a
So
second
Mamdani
that you have a
introduces
savings
this
account.
$127 billion
And,
budget agenda. And
you
his
swore to
plan
your
for the
family,
estate
hand
tax
over
is
heart,
to drop that exemption
that
we
this
talked
money
about
was
from
strictly for
$7.35
fixing a
million
leaking roof.
all the way down to
You said,
$750,000.
if we don't
And
fix
he wants
this
to jack
roof,
the top rate up to
the
a
house is
staggering
gonna collapse.
50%.
It's an existential
50%,
crisis for
half.
the house.
Exactly.
And he's
It's
also
to save
pitching
the
a
house
9%
fund.
corporate
But
tax,
then, your
totally
car
free
breaks
buses,
down,
a
you
$30
spend a little too
minimum
much
wage,
on groceries, you've
and
got bills
Vienna-style
piling up.
social housing.
So what do?
It is
You
a
raid the roof
massive
fund.
progressive
You
agenda.
take that money,
And
pay
the
off your
wild
credit
part is,
cards, and tell your
a
family,
Siena
hey, don't
poll
worry, we'll fix the roof
shows
later.
that 54%
And in this
of New
scenario,
Yorkers,
the roof
actually
is the planet,
support
or at
his
least
push to
Maryland's
raise
climate
taxes on
goals.
millionaires
And the car is
over
a
raising
massive
property taxes on
self-inflicted
everyone else.
Okay, I have to jump in here.
$1.5 billion
The public supports
state
taxing the rich,
budget
sure.
deficit.
State
A
lawmakers are
completely avoidable
chanting tax
deficit,
the
I might
rich.
add.
But
Welcome
dropping
to the
the
deep
exemption
dive.
to $750,000
Today we're exploring a
and taking
classic
half.
case of
Doesn't
fiscal
that
sleight of
fundamentally
hand
change
coming out
who's
of
actually being
Annapolis.
taxed?
It changes it
We're looking
completely.
at the strategic
And this is the
energy
core
investment fund,
ideological clash in the
the
sources.
SAFE.
On one side, you have
It's
the
a
socialist
huge pot of
perspective.
money
They want to
meant to
dismantle
save the
billionaire
environment,
wealth to
but it's
fund
turning into a
universal
hidden
pre-K
tax
and climate
on every
action.
single
They see
person
extreme
paying
wealth
an
as
electric
policy
bill
failure.
in
Right.
Maryland.
But on the other side,
It
economists
really
are
is.
waving
It's become
red
the center of a
flags.
huge
They warn that a
political fight.
50% rate
You've
with a
got a
750K
Democratic governor
threshold will
frustrated
completely obliterate
environmentalists making
that
some very
0.69
awkward
cost-benefit
compromises,
ratio we talked
and
about.
conservative
They say it will
critics who
trigger
are
a massive
rightly
capital
calling this
flight
whole
to
thing a
places like
shell
Tennessee
game.
and
A
Florida.
shell game.
Because it's not
And
just
when you look at
billionaires
the documents
anymore.
we
It
have
brings
today,
us to this
reports,
huge
budget
unintended
proposals,
target,
critiques from Senate
middle-class wealth.
Republicans,
Exactly.
it is really hard to
When you
unsee.
cast a
Our
net
mission
for
for this deep dive
billionaires
is
but
simple.
drop the threshold
Follow
to
the money.
750K,
Always follow
you
the
catch a
money.
lot of
We
regular
are going to
folks.
see
It's
how
like
a
casting a
fund
fishing net
designed to
meant for
fight
great
climate
white
change
sharks
is
but
being
you end
used
up
to plug
hauling in a
holes in
bunch
the
of
state
dolphins.
budget. And we'll
I
dig
mean,
into
look
the
at the
argument that
op-ed
this
from
isn't
Black
found money
Westchester
at
and
all.
real
This is
clear
essentially a
politics.
backdoor
In places like
tax on
Westchester
Chester and Nassau
Let's get
counties.
right into
The
it.
median
The
home
Strategic
price
Energy
already
Investment
exceeds
Fund. It sounds very official, very
$800,000.
important.
Right.
What does it
And for
actually
many
do?
Well,
Black middle-class
on paper,
families in
it is
communities
the
like Mount
state's
Vernon or
green
Yonkers,
piggy bank.
their
This
wealth
IIF
is
is
solely
managed
tied
by
to
the
that family
Maryland
home.
Energy
They don't have massive
Administration.
stock
Its whole stated
portfolios.
purpose
Right,
is
so a
to
family
reduce
bought a
energy
modest
bills,
house in the 90s
cut
for
waste, and
150K.
fund renewable
Inflation
energy.
and the
Like
insane
solar
New York
panels
housing
and
market
efficiency
push
upgrades.
its value
Exactly.
to $800K
But
over
here is the
30
real
years.
aha moment
And
of
suddenly,
the story.
the government considers them ultra
Where
wealthy.
does the money
That's the
actually
exact scenario,
come from?
and it creates what
Because
economists
they aren't
call the
just
forced
taxing you
sale
directly
problem.
for it.
Estate taxes have
No,
to
and
be
that's why
paid in cash.
politicians
You can't just
absolutely
hand
love
the
it. It
government
feels
the
free.
keys to the guest
So about
bedroom.
40%
Right, the IRS
comes
doesn't
from
want your
regional
couch.
carbon auctions.
Exactly. So if kids
But
inherit
the
an
big chunk,
$800,000 growing like crazy, but they don't have the liquid cash to pay a 50% tax bill on it because of that cliff effect.
Which is just
They
a
have
fancy
absolutely
government
no
term for a
choice but to
fine.
sell the home.
Right.
Wow.
It's a fine
so
for failure.
they literally
Let me
lose
break
the
it down.
family home just
Maryland
to pay the
law
tax.
forces
Yes.
utility companies
And
to
critics
buy
in the
a certain
sources
amount
frame
of
this
green energy.
not as
They have to prove they're
taxing the
using
rich,
renewables.
but as
But
wealth
they can't
extraction.
find that green energy, or
They
it's just
argue
way
it
too expensive on the
destroys
market.
black generational wealth and forces
Yeah,
the
the state
sale
gives
of
them an
family
escape
farms.
hatch.
It really
The
frames
utility
this
can just pay a
hyper-local
fee
policy
directly to the
debate
state
in New
instead.
York as
That fee
a
is the
perfect
ACP.
microcosm for the whole
And
country.
here's the kicker.
We're looking at a massive
Utilities are
impending national
increasingly
battle
just paying
over
the
how we
fine
govern,
because it's cheaper
how
than
we
actually
tax,
buying
and
the
really
green
how we
energy.
define
Wait,
wealth.
so
Absolutely.
the
The
climate
sources
fund
lay
is
out
getting
two entirely different
incredibly
moral
rich.
frameworks.
And again, to be totally
Precisely
clear, we're
because
remaining neutral
the green
here,
energy
but one
mandates are
framework
failing.
clearly
Precisely.
prioritizes
It is a
collective
completely
social safety
perverse
net.
incentive.
Lawmakers
The
and
government
progressive
made the
groups
mandate
argue
so
that the
aggressive
wealthiest
and the
are
market is
ignoring
so
the needs of the
distorted
many.
that
They
power
point to
companies
Trump
are just
era
writing
tax
checks
strikes
to the
and
state
say we
instead of
need
going
aggressive
green.
wealth
And the stats on
redistribution
this
to
are just
fund social
staggering.
services.
They are.
Right.
In 2022,
And the other framework
this revenue was
prioritizes private
$77
property
million.
and generational
By
stability.
2025, it
Critics
jumped
like
to
Bruce Blakeman call this the most
$365
extreme
million.
death tax in
Wow.
America.
From 77
They view it
million
as a
to
direct
365
ideological
million in
attack
3
on the
years.
American
Right, so
dream
now the state has
and the
this
core concept of passing
massive
your
accidental
prosperity
pot
down
of
to your
gold.
kids.
It's
So, bringing
supposedly
it
for
all back
green
to the Berkeley
projects.
study,
But
we know
remember, that
taxing
money didn't
billionaires
just
at
fall out of the
16%
sky. The
works
utility
mathematically
companies
for
paid
most
those
state
fines.
budgets.
It does.
And do you think those
But
massive
Mamdani's
corporations just
proposal
eat
is
that
an
cost out of the
entirely
goodness of their
untested
hearts?
radical
Oh,
hypothesis.
absolutely not. They pass
What
every
happens when
single
you
penny of
apply a
that onto the
50%
customer.
rate to the
Exactly.
middle
It shows
class?
up right on your electric
Pushing this
bill.
policy
so you,
could radically
the everyday
redefine
ratepayer,
urban
are
equality,
paying for the
or,
utility's
as the
failure
economists
to meet
warn,
a government
it could
mandate.
trigger an
The state
unprecedented
collects your
economic
money,
exodus.
drops it in
It's
the
a huge
safe,
gamble.
and says, look at all
Well,
this
we've
cash
covered
we
a lot
have
of
for the
ground
climate.
today.
We
Which
started
brings
with
us
the
to the
cold,
raid.
hard math of billionaire migration
Because that money
and
is definitely
cost-benefit
not
ratios.
staying in
We
the
looked at the
climate fund.
aggressive tax
Not
haven
anymore.
marketing
Enter
out of
Governor
Florida.
Wes
I mean, ended
Moore.
up dealing with the
His
really
administration
emotional,
is staring down
high-stakes
a
reality
projected
of
$1.5
inheriting and
billion
potentially losing
budget
a family
deficit.
home in New York.
Yeah, it really
billion.
puts a human face
You
on
can't just
tax
ignore
policy.
a hole that deep.
And it leaves me with a final
And
lingering
when
question
government
for you to
overspends
ponder.
to that degree,
They
as
start
states get more
checking under the
aggressive
couch
and more
cushions for
sophisticated
loose
at trying
change.
to tax wealth
Except
at death,
here, the
what's
couch cushion
next?
is the green
People will
energy
definitely
fund,
find workarounds.
and the loose
Right.
change is
Will we
hundreds
see
of
the
millions
rise of
taxpayer
entirely
dollars.
new,
So what's the actual
untraceable
proposal? How much
asset
are they taking?
classes?
The
Or
government
maybe
plan
alternative
diverts
models of lifetime wealth
$292
transfer that
million
just bypass the state
directly from the
entirely
safe
before you
into
even
the
die.
state's general fund.
Honestly,
Just to
will the
balance the
very
books.
definition
Just to
of
cover their
residence become
overspending.
the biggest legal
They
battleground of
are
the next
using
decade?
energy
It's very
fines to
possible. The
pay
lawyers are gonna be
for
busy, that's for
general
sure.
government
I bet they are.
operations.
Thank you so much for joining us on
Bureaucracy,
this deep dive. We'll see
salaries,
you
office
next time.
supplies,